Hello, my name is David Lance, and I just want to thank you for tuning into this conversation about a topic that I care deeply about. I'm calling it Defending the American Way of Life and Discerning a Way Forward. And so, one of the things that I think that is helpful to think about is if you've been paying attention to news and the culture, things of that nature, then you are probably aware that for years there have been various people in the background who have been wanting to destroy what we might euphemistically call the American way of life. If this is not a topic that you have been paying attention to, then it might be something that you might wish to check into. My purpose today is to not do a deep dive into that conversation, but rather to provide an overview of some thoughts I have about addressing the problem. There's a guy by the name of Saul Alinsky who died in the early 1970s, but he developed something called critical theory. Now, you may have heard the term critical race theory, which comes out of that. But critical theory was originally designed as a way to promote Marxism and communism, and was designed to get Americans to be critical of the American way of life. And so from that, the term critical theory began to develop. Along those lines, very recently, I think in the year 2019, a woman by the name of Nicole Hannah Jones came up with something that she referred to as the 1619 Project, basically saying that America was built on racism, as opposed to what we might call the 1776 Project, that being that liberty was created with the Declaration of Independence and the birthing of the American nation as we know it today. And so we have those fights that are going on. In fact, there have been in the news recently, Governor DeSantis of the state of Florida has essentially said that we're not going to teach the 1619 project. We're not going to teach critical theory or critical race theory in our public schools, at least in the state of Florida. However, over in the state of California, that is a topic of ongoing discussion, and perhaps even as I speak, those things are being adopted in that state. And so we see those sorts of things coming on. I've done talks about a group called the Revolutionary Abolitionist Movement. On their webpage at essentially the revolutionaryabolition.org, they state this: will we deserve to breathe while knowing that millions of people are are enslaved in our midst? Our historical mission is clear. We must burn down the American plantation once and for all. So there's a picture there of their website. If you go to their website, I had the URL there. It's revolutionaryabolition.org /political framework. So if you want, you can go and read more about that. But they're wanting to burn down what they refer to as the American plantation. And so one of the things that I see that is coming together in various things, such as the 1619 Project, critical theory, critical race theory, the Revolutionary Abolitionist Movement, are three events that are coalescing, at about the same time, going back to 2019, 2020. The first of those is the COVID pandemic. By the way, today I got my first of two vaccines using the Pfizer vaccine. So we're dealing with the ramifications of the COVID pandemic, not just in America, but across the planet. But then you have groups like Antifa and their funders who have seized on events of police killings of black individuals to justify the, quote, burning down of the American plantation once and for all. Now, of course, all these things mix valid arguments and so forth with then using them to justify a public relations campaign of things to tear down the American way of life. And so then the third factor is that the 2020 election colors all aspects of this discussion of the American way of life as being either pro or anti-Trump. You can hardly get into a conversation about this without it then defaulting to, are you a Trump supporter or do you dislike Trump? And so, at least from my perspective, a problem that exists here is that conservatives, and I would count myself as a conservative, tend to be reactive. We tend to be prone to preaching to the choir. If you are on social media and you look at the groups to which you belong, probably like myself, you belong to groups with people who more or less think the way that you do. I know that that's true of me, and so we are collectively guilty of preaching to the choir, so to speak. And so another thing, and certainly I find myself guilty of this. I watched Sean Hannity's programs, listened to his radio programs throughout 2019 and 2020, waiting for the hammer to drop on the Durham report on how the Trump-Russia collusion investigation got started, or the DOJ Inspectors General report, or the name your favorite report that I hoped would wake up the silent majority. We placed our faith in those things, and they still haven't come about, or at least not had the result that we might have hoped they would have had. And frankly, we trusted in the Trump presidency. And by saying trusting in the Trump presidency, we trusted Trump and his officials to take care of things so that we wouldn't have to. And then we have sat back and expected the talking head class, the elected officials, to do something. Members of Congress, or putting our faith, say, in a Governor DeSantis, who we now hope perhaps will run for president in 2024. In other words, we default to it's somebody else's job. Yay, rah, I will cheer from the sidelines. But I would submit to you that these are false hopes. We must become more proactive, not reactive. Now, back in 2019, I believe it was 2019, it might have been early 2020, there was a blog that was written by Thomas Klingenstein titled Preserving the American Way of Life. And I would encourage you to go out and find that and read that. He does a great job, I believe, on describing what conservatives mean by the, quote, American way of life. And if that doesn't help, then I would suggest that you find a new legal immigrant to the United States who has gone through the process of becoming an American citizen to ask them what they feel the American life means, why they felt so, why it was so important for them to leave whatever country they came from to become an American citizen. I can't think of a better person to ask that question of. But if you're a member of the grassroots, and full disclosure, at one point in time, I was the state director of the Indiana Christian Coalition, and so I was very deep into the grassroots movements of conservative politics in the state of Indiana. And so one of the things that I have seen the need for is using the internet, social media, for something that is sometimes referred to as the viral loop. I don't think I invented that term. I've seen that out there. But there is the concept of a swarm effect. So think of a nest of bees or hornets that perhaps you stir up. What happens when you stir them up? They all swarm and come and try to sting you. Trust me, I've done that. I've been guilty of stirring up a hornet's nest a time or two when I was younger. And so conservatives need to learn how to use the viral loop in order to create this swarm effect to leverage the power of viral marketing. Viral marketing is simply the old word of mouth where you tell somebody that you either like or you don't like something, and they go tell some people, and so on and so forth. Now, last year I created a course, How to Teach with Technology Online. And it's designed for anybody that wants to use technology in a way to communicate online. I teach various courses using Zoom. I'm creating this particular Facebook Live project using Zoom and sharing my screen with PowerPoint and so forth. And so that course has a number of sections dealing with various technologies. But one of the reasons why I really created it was I wrote a book back in 2017 called The Unraveling of We the People, and I laid out 6 things that conservatives needed to do. And one of those things that conservatives, I felt, needed to do was to do a better job of using the power of social media to create stories, to create lessons to teach younger people. You know, I'm a baby boomer, and there's lots of retired or soon to be retired baby boom teachers who have subject matter expertise, whether it's in history or language skills or geography or things of that nature. Imagine if those conservatives learned how to use the power of technology to share the knowledge that they have with Gen Z or millennial younger people. And so I created that course, not just to teach people how to use technology, but specifically to help conservatives to leverage the power of technology, the power of the internet, to basically share our voice with people, especially given that the mainstream media will not in most cases, share our point of view. Now, there are a number of conservative groups and networks that exist across the country. There are groups that meet online through various secure chat sessions, Zoom sessions. There are Tea Party groups and so forth. And I feel that these groups can create messages about the values that lie at the heart of the American way of life. So imagine that you've got, say, a Tea Party of 40 people. You all could get together and say, let's take one topic and let's create a series of messages that relate to that we can all share with our kids and our grandkids on social media. And so here is the concept of what I see being a product of this. You could do one-page background memos on whatever a topic is that you might select. You could do short 2 or 3 sentence elevator talking points. I know when I got started in politics, back when Ronald Reagan was running for president and I was working with the young Republicans here in the state of Indiana, one of the things that I did was I wrote 2 or 3 sentence talking points that could be used when people would go and meet with various groups to talk about whether Ronald Reagan running for president or some other Republican running for office. Writing talking points is something that many political activists have done over the years. The 2 or 3 sentence elevator speech is just a version of that. You can create picture memes with captions. I've got 2 examples here. So, for example, there's a picture on the top of the Lord of the Flies. Above the picture it says, "What is the American way of life? One nation under God with liberty guaranteed by law," or "A broken people living in fear of a lawless mob seeking to tear this nation apart." And certainly in certain cities across America, that's what America has become. I think of the scene of the McCloskeys outside their home as approximately 300 protesters come marching through their private property. Is that what we want to live as? Another one, back in 2006, the movie Superman Returns comes out. And the screenwriters basically said that they wanted to treat Superman as an illegal alien back at a time when there was a big fight over passing comprehensive immigration reform. And so they change one of the sayings about what Superman stands for in the movie. And so we might say, so does Superman still stand for truth, justice, and all that stuff? All that stuff, what happened to the American way? There's a scene where Barry White in that movie says, does he still stand for truth, justice, all that stuff? The writers of that movie deliberately got rid of the American way and put in all that stuff. And so creating memes that communicate ideas is something that we can do. We can also create video messages that can be shared with friends, family, and savables. In politics, there's 3 types of voters that I learned about a long time ago when I became a political activist. There are saints. Those are the people that vote for your candidate or for your issue. There are sinners. Those are the people that vote against you. And there are savables. Those are the people that are sitting on the fence, the undecided, so to speak, who can be saved by giving them enough information that they will vote in favor of your candidate, in favor of your ideas. And so creating a video message, such as what I'm doing here, is something that a group could do. Now, I had somebody ask me, well, David, what do you mean by a background memo? And I forget the fact that many people don't know what that is. I wrote that for a living as my first job working for the Indiana legislature and so forth. You have to write background memos describing what is a policy that we might want to adopt and why should we adopt it, give the pros and the cons, and what are the steps needed to execute the proposed idea. And so what I have in mind is, first of all, pick a value. And there are various values that I'll get into in a later conversation. But if the value is the American way of life, that's what we're going to talk about. And then how do we define it? How do we describe it? Well, we're going to need a short paragraph that does that. And then next, what American documents, statements, events express this value? Well, perhaps the Gettysburg Address would certainly be something that underlies the concept of the American way of life. That under God, this nation shall know a rebirth of liberty, for example. And so what stories bring the value to life for everyday Americans? Now, this is where it's really important to understand that personalizing these things with your personal story is very, very relevant. So, for example, my wife is Chinese. She came over here from an orphanage in Hong Kong. Her adoptive parents went through a process to bring her here. That's the story of the American way of life, where somebody comes to America, starts life fresh in a way that would not have been possible, and gets to live the so-called American dream by growing up in this country with the benefits that we have to provide. Yes, we have problems, but we also have benefits. How does my story explain those benefits? How does your story explain those benefits? We've got to get good at telling stories. And so one of the things that, if you think back to a speech that President Trump gave, where he promoted this value, was his speech in front of Mount Rushmore. I watched that with my daughter-in-law, and we were blown away with the story of America. Now, it doesn't have to be about Trump. It can be about whoever the political candidate is that perhaps you're advocating for, or whatever public policy issue that you're advocating for. How does that bring forth this particular value, in this case, the American way of life? And then finally, what can I do to promote the value? Be specific. I'm promoting this value by creating this video right now to try to encourage you to basically unleash the power of creativity and come up with ideas that you might do. And so thinking about all of these generational divides that we face, boomers versus millennials, boomers versus Gen Z, how do we communicate ideas? I teach various college classes, sometimes in dual credit classes, where I'm in front of a high school class where they're going to get both college credit and high school credit. And I often have to stop and ask them what a particular word means, because I realize that they don't associate the same meaning with words that I would associate with, particularly even from defining from the dictionary. So sometimes we stop and spend time defining a word from the dictionary, which means Googling the definition and so forth. So we have to confront the fact that different generations think differently. Think back to when you were a young person, possibly in the 1960s, and certainly we thought differently than our parents did when we were that age. And so there might be 5 different values, messages, themes that we might put together. One would be marriage and the family. Certainly there is the traditional thought about that, and everything else, including this transgender thing that is hitting us in the news every day. Another one is justice. You and I might think about Lady Justice, who is blind because why? Because it's important to not see the person, to judge them not based on the color of their skin, but on the content of their character. But social justice really does require that we look at people's skin color in order to provide fairness to a group that in previous times have not received equal treatment and so forth. And so that's another kind of debate that's going on out there. Equality. Alexis de Tocqueville came to America and he talked about one of the great things that he saw in America was this idea of equal opportunity and everybody being on an equal footing. We understand that, if you're in my age group at least, as equal opportunity does not mean that you will end up in the same position as somebody else. But now we're thinking of equal outcome. Everybody should end up in the same outcome. 1776, equal opportunity versus 1619, equal outcome. E pluribus unum. I ask my students every semester, what does that Latin phrase mean? And they don't know. So we pull out some coins, penny, nickel, dime, quarter, whatever, and we see that it's on those coins, and we talk about that. And then we talk about the original meaning of a melting pot, what does that mean, versus a salad bowl. What does that mean? A salad bowl, you can identify the croutons, you can identify the onions, etc. And if you don't like them, if you want to discriminate against them, you toss them out of your salad. But if you put everything into a blender, then it becomes a melting pot. It's blended together and you can't distinguish where the onions begin and the croutons end. And so that's a difference. And then God or Gaia. I've thought about this. If you think about the current movement of environmentalism, save the planet, end the Keystone Pipeline and so forth, it's all about saving Mother Earth. Well, Gaia is the Greek goddess Mother Earth. And so now we tend to just worship the earth as though it were a living thing. Or do we worship the God of the Bible? And so this is a culture clash between age groups, especially as we have a growing number of young people who have never been in church and don't know the message of the Bible, but they've heard everything about Captain Planet and all those other things. And so they, in a sense, worship the earth. And that's an issue that I feel that our generation has not paid close enough attention to understand the effect happening throughout the culture. Well, that's the challenge then. To rise a night, to use a metaphor from a movie called The Kingdom of Heaven. And so here's a meme that comes from that movie where Orlando Bloom is made a knight, and he knights other peasants to defend Jerusalem against the invading Saracens. And he says, what man is a man who does not make the world better? Do the right thing. God wills it. And so there are many cheerleaders in our movement, but few doers. The doers need to stop doing it all and teach and or delegate to those who are not doing hardly anything so that others can replicate the work. And so you might be sitting there and saying, well, what can I do? I need to basically study up. I don't have enough skills. Forget that. Start where you're at. Don't fall prey to analysis paralysis. In the coming months, I plan to start doing some trainings on how to create memes, videos, etc., related to some of these topics. And so I'll flesh out in more detail some of the things that I just mentioned on the previous slide. I would encourage you to email me at dlance@wisejargon.com. If you would please put in the subject heading, Defending the American Way of Life, so that I know that that's what we're going to talk about. And so hopefully this has been of help to you. And perhaps I've sparked some creative ideas in your mind and planted a seed that will hopefully blossom into other activity. Well,